Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Welcome to our ritual night talk for August 3rd, 2021. I'm going to be a good YouTuber here right off the bat. So, subscribe to the channel, like the video, click the little bell to request notifications. That'll help you never miss one of these ritual night talks when we go live and never miss a video on our channel here. So I'm Scott Stenwick, your host for these ritual night events, hosted under the auspices of Leaping Laughter OTO in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Tonight, I haven't included anything in the way of additional content, just the donation link, which you know what to do. And I'm going to be talking about the subject of magical words and vibration. So vibration is a basic magical technique that you use all the time in ceremonial work. And this was actually prompted by a question from somebody on the blog who was asking if I could talk about this a little bit more. So I'm going to get to that, but I'm going to start off talking about the idea of magical words in general. Okay, so there's a whole lot of names and formulas that we use in our ceremonial rituals, particularly in the thelemic system. And one might be tempted to ask, well, why are you vibrating or doing anything special with these particular names? What's the significance? And of course, you could look back through the history and see, okay, well, there's a history of, these God names being used, these angel names being used, these spirit names being used, and so on. But in terms of practical, exoteric, operant magic, it's like, what exactly is it about these words that, vibration is supposed to do? I did talk in a previous video about energy work a couple of weeks back. And so one of the things that connects words you vibrate with energy work is that what you're effectively doing when you're inhaling and then you're exhaling and vibrating and forming the name, okay, your tongue is touching the roof of your mouth, and according to the Qigong system, that creates a circuit that runs through your body. It's called the orbit. And when you vibrate a name, you're vibrating in, you're doing something like starting the orbit, but then by pronouncing the name, you're deliberately breaking that circuit, and you are shaping the breath into the word that is being vibrated. Okay, so some of what's going on is you're just putting like breath and therefore energy into these words as you are saying them in a particular manner that resonates a certain way. Okay. But I will also say that, I've seen various commentary online about stuff about how, the magic we do is the magic of the word, and like language is so important in terms of how we do magic. And I have to say, I am a little bit skeptical of some of the assumptions that surround that idea. Certainly, words are tools that we use to communicate things. We use them to verbalize our intentions, which verbalizing intentions is different than just thinking them to yourself. It is true. But at the same time, there also is this whole kind of linguistics angle of magic that I've never found particularly interesting. And I think that basically somebody could work out, oh, here's this word, here's its history, here's its etymology, and so on. And while that can be interesting in terms of where the word came from, why we use it the way we do, and so on, for people who are really into that kind of thing, to me, I'm looking for more of a practical advantage, okay? I'll give you an example. So let's say that there was a particular word of power that was like really central to a spell that I wanted to do, okay? And it's not obviously, but I mean, having to dig into the history of the words, somebody found that, oh, well, this word going back, however long, is actually associated with birds. Okay, just as an example. Okay, and so I took my wand here, and I take a feather. I tie a feather onto the wand, and then I cast a spell, and all of a sudden it works way better. Okay, I would be more inclined to believe that. However, I have never actually had that happen. Okay, and that's just kind of a silly example because it's a simple thing that you could try, and I don't know, maybe I'm also thinking of that feather in Harry Potter or something like that. But anyway, the point is that if somebody could give me something that was based on the etymology of a word, the structure of the word, and so on. And based on that knowledge of the word and where it came from, I could actually do something that improved my magic. That's really what I would be looking for. But instead, it seems more like, well, people research it, to get kind of a deeper understanding of how the rituals are put together the way they are. But I think it's also important to understand that rituals are kind of a compression of words, ideas, thoughts, and so on into a simple form that can be used in a general way when you're doing magical operations. Like the lesser ritual of the pentagram. You can do the lesser ritual of the pentagram very quickly. But if you look into the origin of the 4 tetragrammatic god names, you look into the origin of the different angels, you go back to see, okay, where do they appear in the Bible? I mean, all kinds of things like that. You can look at stuff like the Kabbalistic cross, okay, going back to like the Kirch of Kabbalah, which is kind of where the final split, where Christian Kabbalah broke off into kind of its own system. Then that Christian Kabbalah became Golden Dawn Kabbalah, and that became Thelemic Kabbalah when Crowley got involved. So where our system comes from, all that history is there, just in something simple like the Kabbalistic cross. But the question is, if you're not really like a researcher, like doing an academic paper on how this ritual is put together, my question would still be, I'm not sure that understanding of all that stuff and how it fits together necessarily improves the ritual. I am, of course, open to testing a ritual that is a variation of that and seeing if it does work better. And I've done a few changes here and there. Like I talk about how, well, not really changes, but in some ways going back to an older version of ritual. Like, for example, vibrating, Yod He Vav He as Yahweh or Yehovah as a word being the point, versus spelling it out as vibrating Yod He Vav He like some modern magicians do. I do find that the ritual seems to be less effective when you do full-on probability testing with operations, change the set variable, and so on. So that's one of the things that I teach my students about. But I mean, that's not really even a deep linguistic understanding of anything. Okay. Even Crowley going to Yehovah is actually wrong in the sense that what is going on is that's taking Yod He Vav He, and then you're looking in the Torah where the vowel markers are and filling in those vowel markers and then getting a word. But in fact, when Torah is read, what you see is Yod He Vav He actually has the vowel markers for the word Adonai, and you're actually supposed to read it as Adonai instead of trying to pronounce it. And so that's where Yehovah, Jehovah, some of these things come from, of Christians who are reading this and saying, oh, it's like this. And well, it's not, but the interesting thing about it is Yehovah, vibrating that instead of spelling out Yod He Vav He, works better. I don't know why, because in theory, from an etymology standpoint, right, you would think, oh, well, that's got to be incorrect because now I know this deeper thing about the word. I know that the vowel markers don't line up, and so you shouldn't pronounce it that way. And it's like, but if you do it, it seems like it works. I actually pronounce it Yahweh, which is believed to be probably the closest to how it should sound, but nobody really knows for sure as far as like historical scholarship. But anyway, that's an example of a piece of etymology that doesn't really seem to help. Okay. And I have to say too, there are a couple of reasons I'm a little biased against some of the emphasis on words and words and so forth in the way we do our magic, just because, number one, I don't think in words. Okay. Never have. It's completely alien to me, the idea that somebody's thoughts inside their head would be words. I mean, I kind of taught myself to do it and kind of turn on the sort of narrative for when I'm writing. And so like when I'm writing a book, I can kind of turn it on to do like the dialogue for the characters and stuff. But I don't do it in my daily life. I mean, there was an article I saw months ago about how people are all confused that people exist who have an internal monologue. I don't have an internal monologue at all. If I want to if I want to go over something linguistic, I practically have to say it to myself. I say it out loud, then I hear it back, and then I think about it. Okay. And I can kind of like sub vocalize a little bit and kind of hear it in your mind, sort of thing. But nope, don't think in words. And so, I wind up being critical of people who are in linguistics who are big on like the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which obviously for people like me can't possibly be relevant, because it's this idea that the words you use shape your thoughts, with the underlying assumption being your thoughts are made of words, and they're not. So I mean, that's one thing out of there. The other thing is, I had exposure back in the early 90s to the beginnings of what back then they called cognitive science. And cognitive science was this attempt to talk about, how the mind really works. In my experimental psychology program, we had a lot of stuff like this. And one of the groups that came together for doing cognitive science was linguists. And it was because of the linguists in cognitive science, at least this is my understanding, that cognitive science kept going toward this idea called symbolic artificial intelligence. Okay, so I work in the computer field. So symbolic artificial intelligence is the idea that if you ever seen a computer program like the old ELIZA, okay, so what it is it's this command line, you can type stuff in, and it seems to respond with natural language. Okay. And so the idea behind symbolic AI was that, well, if you could make that matrix that it was using of language complicated enough and align it the right way, you would actually have a mind. It would actually be conscious, because, well, your mind is just words arranged in a particular order, and you can do that on a computer. That's hyperbolizing. I'm aware there's a lot more nuance to that. I've been called out for that before, like for oversimplifying Freudian psychology. And yeah, I was oversimplifying Freudian psychology, but I was using it to prove a point, and I'm using this to prove a point. Symbolic AI basically led artificial intelligence researchers down this path that essentially, it basically dead-ended about 10 years ago. It was clear that this was not how you were going to get a mind to work, even for something like symbolic language processing. They figured out, all right, well, what we really need to do is we really need to do something like machine learning, which is more like how the brain actually does stuff. And then you can combine that with a data bank of words and stuff like that you link in a search system into it. And that's where you get like your Siris and your Cortanas and those kinds of search engines that you can just talk to and they seem to respond in natural language. The little virtual assistant thing is basically where symbolic AI led us to. And not that those things aren't useful, but the idea was they were trying to build something that actually thought the way a human thinks. And it's very clear that those programs do not. So, getting back from that little digression there. So, words and magic are important for a couple of reasons, but I am skeptical about the idea that they're important because they represent some crucial thing about the internal workings of the mind. It may feel that way for some people, but we know now that there are people who really don't think that way. And also, from what I've seen, it doesn't seem like whether you think that way or not, it has much of an effect on how effective this type of ceremonial work is. So there really isn't a connection there either, as far as we can tell, between verbal thinking and being able to use magic that involves a lot of words and vibrations. Okay, and so it seems like you could vibrate it regardless of what's going on in your mind. And I've had people argue things like, oh, well, spirits, they can't read your thoughts. They can only like perceive what you verbalize. And that has not been my experience at all. Spirits they maybe can't read deep thoughts. They can definitely read surface thoughts, especially the more intelligent and coherent spirits that you work with. And they really are trying to basically communicate with you by pure thought. Maybe it comes across as an image, maybe it comes across as words. But like I was saying last week about scrying, it has to do with your psychic senses. And they're talking to you by means of the psychic modality that your brain is parsing into. Maybe it's words, maybe it's images, maybe it's feelings, and so on, based on how your psychic senses map onto your physical senses. Okay. Now, the other point about words that is interesting is words that are vibrated do seem to correspond to actual spirits. So when I conjure up a spirit, one of the things I do is I vibrate the name over and over again. Okay. And when I do that, the manifestation of the spirit seems to become stronger and more powerful. And that's the thing I'm doing where I'm feeling with my hands. It feels kind of like a tingle and kind of like a temperature shift at the same time. When they reach like a certain level of intensity, I'm like, oh, okay, I can interact with them now. So that's what I'm doing when I do that ritual step. And so clearly, there is some way in which spirits out there in the universe are linked to or resonate with a particular name, and that's the name that we call them by. Okay. I am more skeptical about the idea of take some syllables and put them together and vibrate them like you're doing a conjuration, like some cutting edge magical experimentation has been done along those lines. But that type of a thing, if you're going to do that, you can go ahead and build something like a telesma or a servitor. You're an artificial spirit of some kind. Same techniques can be used for talismans, which pretty much work the same way. You basically do your servitor, telesma, artificial spirit, and you're essentially just like binding it into the talisman as this material basis. And so that type of a thing is something that you could do. And presumably, if the name is out there in the world and your spirit has a non-local consciousness, there may be a point where other magicians could start vibrating the name of that spirit and it would show up. The point is that at the beginning, though, the work needs to be done by a magician to organize the thing into a spirit in the first place. And maybe that's what happened with some of these spirits from antiquity. I don't know. We don't really have records of stuff like that. The grimoire system we do have records of its creation is the Enochian system. And it seems like there weren't any techniques like that being used. It seems like the Enochian system, if you read through it, is essentially a system where, you've got a scryer who's relaying information. These spirits are like presenting themselves by name. The scryer is, sometimes, calling the spirit by name, like talking to one spirit says, oh, you need to talk to this other angel. Oh, other angel, come forth kind of thing. And so it seems like what's going on there is they're dealing with spirits with pre-existing names. Also feeds into some of my objections to the idea of working with fictional characters, although that really is not something that I see much in the magical sphere. Back in the 90s, it was really popular, though. And this idea that, oh, you could conjure up an entity like from fiction and somehow it's the same kind of thing as an entity that's been out there, been worked with by magicians and so on. And it kind of isn't. And the reason it isn't is because while you're focusing your attention on this, if you don't specifically do the ritual stuff to construct it, and you're just focusing on, say a name, just the fact that people in the popular culture are familiar with the name does not really seem to imply to add any sort of power to the name. You're really pretty much just working with your own energy there. Now, again, the caveat is that doesn't mean you can't get results with it. There are people who do pop culture magic. I think Taylor Elwood is probably like the big expert on that. And I mean, he does some of this stuff and works with like pop culture ideas and things in magic. And by all means, if it's something that works for you, go for it. It's just, it's never really worked for me. And my hypothesis is it has to do with this macrocosmic resonance. So where the spirit, when you call it, it has to actually be kind of a coherent manifestation of consciousness and an independent entity in its own right before you really are able to call it up by name and before it's really able to do anything on its own. So that's kind of my take on that. Now, getting through all that background. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about vibration and how you do it. Okay. So Aleister Crowley gives directions in Liber O for vibration. So there's a visualization with this, and this is actually easier than it sounds, but at first it sounds a little complicated. So, excuse me, allergies are acting up a little bit today. All right, so what you're supposed to do is you stand, your arms outstretched, and then you're going to kind of visualize the name. I mean, you can visualize it like spelled here or something. I usually kind of just conceptualize the name and what it represents. But you breathe in, and you're going to pull the name into your lungs. You're going to expand your diaphragm. So you're breathing in as fully as you can. Okay. And by the way, one of the tricks for that is, so a lot of people breathe like up here and it's really tense. And what you want to do is breathe into your diaphragm. And a way to practice that is, instead of like just trying to force air into your lungs, practice just extending your stomach. So like if you don't breathe in and you just like push your abdomen out, okay? If you then just kind of like, open your throat, let the breath flow in, it's going to flow in naturally to fill your diaphragm. And so then all you really have to do is then relax the diaphragm again, and the air is naturally pushed out. That's one of the ways we learn like Qigong set breathing. And it works fine for this method too. So you're going to stand with arms outstretched, and you're going to breathe in. Remember, relaxed Qigong breathing deep into the diaphragm. And as you're breathing in, you're going to visualize the name going down through your body. Okay. You can visualize it moving down the middle pillar, or like down the spiritual channel, which is like a tube that runs through the center of your body. That works fine. And you're trying to time it so that when your lungs are completely full, the name has reached all the way to your feet. Okay. And when that happens, then you visualize the name shooting upwards out your mouth as you do the sign of the Emperor. So let's say that I'm going to vibrate Adonai. So I'm going to, arms outstretched. Adonai. Hopefully the microphone didn't tweak out on that. Sometimes it tweaks when I vibrate. Okay, and so as you vibrate it, you're going to make the sign of the Emperor, which is like this. Okay, it's and the sign of the Emperor doesn't need to be super extreme. That's another. So sometimes I see people, it's like, Crowley's got like a thing where he's like bent way over in one of the diagrams. Actually, the sign of the Emperor is really kind of just like a push. Okay, and I do Qigong, so I like to face the bubbling well points on my hands a little bit forward when I do it. Okay, so you vibrate the name, lungs are empty. Then as you inhale, you're going to step back and you make the sign of silence. Okay, which is hold your foot off to an angle. You pull your foot back, and then you touch your lips with your finger. For the Emperor, some people do it on different feet. I extend the left foot when I do it. That's just how I learned it. I don't necessarily think that extending it with the right foot is a problem, although there is like some symbolism related to the right and left, apparently in the Golden Dawn system. So you may want to consult the Golden Dawn source about that. And then the sign of silence, that's another like etymology thing that's kind of interesting. It doesn't really affect the workings of the ritual. But so back when Crowley was writing stuff, this was thought to represent silence, when in fact what it represents Hippocrates, who is Crowley talks about as the god of silence. But Hippocrates, the deal is he's actually a child. And so the other way to give this is like this with your thumb. And it's supposed to be a child sucking their thumb, is apparently what the actual Egyptian etymology of it is, which is actually fine because you have manifestation and potentiality. And that works okay. The symbolism doesn't break. It still is operable. Okay, so that's a cool thing, that there's an etymology difference there. But again, it doesn't seem like it affects the function of the work. And actually, it doesn't really affect the function of the sign either. Okay. So in terms of how you speak when you vibrate, okay, that's a thing that people have a lot of questions about. And the way I learned it back in the day was you want to kind of find a tone where your head resonates. So it's like, I get about there. And that's kind of the resonant point in my head. And so, especially when starting out, you vibrate names at about that frequency. You kind of want your head to vibrate when you do it. And one of the other things is, it is helpful in your practice to at least some of the time make some noise. Okay. And some of that is just to overcome, the self-consciousness of a beginner as, I'm vibrating this word. I'm like, with a name. Okay, what is that? Just to get over kind of that sense of, there's kind of a sense of awkwardness when you've never done magic and you sit down and you try to do it. It helps to practice and make some noise. However, you do not need to vibrate loud in order for it to be effective. If you like to vibrate loud, cool. If you don't like to vibrate that loud, the point is more the resonance and the frequency, not the volume. Okay. It's just you got to get up to a certain volume before you feel what the resonance is. So, I mean, I have worked with magicians in the past who are like, we live in the world where the gods are hard of hearing, and they would just, vibrate like loud enough to, like shake the windows and stuff like this. And okay, it's impressive when you do it, but it's also really loud. Okay. And you don't need to do that all the time. You should be comfortable enough doing magic that if you're in a situation that calls for loud vibration, let's say you're doing a ritual at like a large outdoor festival and you got a whole bunch of people way out, and stuff like that, and you're casting from the center and you want it to be heard, that's a place for loud vibration and you should be able to do it. Okay. But by all means, it's not something that you need to do all the time. If you are, doing a ritual in your bedroom before you go to sleep, I do this all the time. Okay. And I'm not going to do loud vibration, wake anybody up. Right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to vibrate at the frequency, but I could do it very softly. Okay. So I can do it kind of like this. And you may, I'm not sure how the microphone is going to pick this up, but. The point is, I'm maintaining the frequency, but I'm not doing it as this kind of volume thing. So I'm not really projecting when I do that. And same with pentagrams, because this is actually more of an intonation thing. So pentagrams, again, same thing. It's just enough sound to support the tone. You can even do the ritual without vibration where you like whisper the words. It's good to speak them regardless, but you can whisper the words and then in your mind's eye, imagine them, going out and doing whatever it is you're trying to do with your practice. That works fine too. And probably you're getting at this point that vibration is something where, okay, so it's an important technique and we use it a lot, but it's also left up a lot to individual discretion. Okay. And so it doesn't be loud, but it should still be kind of at the resonant frequency of your head if it's soft. Or, understand that if you have to do it silently and you're just like whispering or mouthing the words, understand you're doing it without the vibration, and that's still better than not doing it. Okay. And at the same time, there's this stuff involved with how we do breathing, like with the energy work kind of thing. And it is important when doing magic to breathe freely and evenly. Okay. One of the things with Qigong is about, energy follows attention and it also follows breath. So you combine your breath and your attention and with the word. And that alludes back to the Buddhist tradition where they talk about unifying body, speech, and mind. A lot of these techniques are really about focusing your will to like a point. Okay. When you vibrate a name, you should be thinking of nothing but the name. And that is the internal important to get up to. Crowley talks about how a single vibration properly performed should exhaust the student and like blot out, whatever, right? Okay. It's not necessarily the case that you need to exert yourself to that degree. But one of the things about exerting yourself to that degree, at least at the beginning when you're practicing, is it makes sure that you're vibrating that name and that name is all you're focused on. Okay. You get to a point where, you've worked with your mind more and you're better at, okay, I'm vibrating this name and that's what I'm paying attention to. I am completely focused on this name. When you can do that, you don't necessarily need to, do something, loud and like that's like loud enough that it's going to like blot out your mind or something. Although, part of the effect is, you're hearing the word as you're vibrating it. So that's going into your auditory cortex. And, you've got a visualization that you're doing at the same time. And then you've got a motion with your body and breath and all that stuff together. It's kind of like, well, you're juggling enough things that your mind is basically occupied. And it's not going to wander. And that really is what's important there, is that you want to be in a position where your mind isn't wandering as you are vibrating the names. You're vibrating, but you're thinking, oh, did I, lock my car out in the parking lot? Yeah, don't do that. You want to get to a point where the name is the focus. And I mean, you can also be thinking, of course, like visualizations. Okay, like you star ruby. Okay, you're flinging the pentagram and you're vibrating the name. I mean, you want to be visualizing the pentagram at the same time you're vibrating the name, but not some kind of like chattery thing that is distracting. You just want to be focused on the ritual and what it is. And I mean, that too is a basic rule of doing magic. It's like you're going to do your best magic when you're completely present in the space and focused on what you're doing, and you don't have a bunch of like, random monkey chatter going around in your mind as you're going through the steps. Okay, you just get more effective magic if you focus your will better. And that is not something that is, just focus your will and it's like some, really simple, easy thing. That's it really, it's one of these things where it's easy to say, but it takes practice to do. All of this stuff, easy to say, but it takes practice to do. The other point that I wanted to make was that was with how you're dealing with tracing while vibrating. So I talked about that a little bit in my thing on energy work. And so when you trace while vibrating, it's more like you're breathing the name in while you're coming down to your feet, and then the name comes back up and out as you're tracing. And you have your tracing line up so the name is fully vibrated when you complete the figure. Then you just move on, to the next quarter, and you do the same thing with pentagrams, hexagrams, really any lineal figure that you work with. And in that case, it's more of a qigong type technique where what you're doing is you're working with the energy, and with that energy, you are kind of shaping that energy into something that resonates with the thing that you're trying to do and trying to work with. So that is kind of an overview of some of the ideas about vibration, some of the ideas about words. One of the things that you will find is, I'll talk about this a little bit because I haven't covered it previously, is there are various formulas in thelemic magic. And so, Crowley had this idea of the word as logos was like a formula that packed a bunch of things together. So a lot of the time it would be like a Kabbalistic phrase, like, Ararita, which symbolizes unity, is it's a Hebrew phrase that means one is his number, one is his numeration, and his permutation is one. It's something like that. I'm not quoting it right, but what it is it's compressed into basically like an acronym. And so that is what we call notericon in our system of Kabbalah. You take a longer phrase and you turn it into an acronym. Agla is another one. Agla is actually a notericon of Ate, Leolam, Ate, what is it? It's Ate Gabor Leolam Adonai. And so actually you've got Adonai showing up in two places. Adonai is in the south in the lesser pentagram. But I mean, it's a notericon, and it goes back to the Key of Solomon. It's used extensively in the Key of Solomon. And so definitely this was a thing where with grimoires, you take these symbols and put them together. And then, we talk about the various formulas and thelema that represent various principles. And in many cases, there's a bunch of different layers to it. And you've got this kind of simple thing that you can vibrate, but it's supposed to encode a whole lot of meaning. Okay. And, and what's interesting about that is you would think that would go back to this idea of, we're going to do etymology and look at all the meaning that it encodes. And it may very well be that, a word or phrase encodes like its entire history into its etymology. And probably there's some significance to doing magical work with that. I just really haven't come across it in any kind of a format that I can test. And so that's really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for stuff that improves my practical magic in a testable way, and or, improves shifts in consciousness and things like that. I mean, certainly study of words. That's something that is done in the non-magical, the Jewish Kabbalistic system. is there are meditations that they do on passages of scripture and names and stuff like that. And it's completely different from what we do. But it is the idea that studying the meaning encoded in a word or text is something that you can do, and you can work with it in a way that provides you deeper insights into things. So just like doing gematria with words. Here's a word that I got from a spirit. Oh, it works out to this really significant number. And that's kind of neat because you've got a source of meaning there that's coming from outside yourself. That your brain isn't doing those calculations. It happens to come out to a significant number. And probability-wise, that's helpful and useful in magic. You could use that to test the spirit. Spirit gives you a message. You say, all right, spirit, give me a word of power. Spirit gives you a word. You go down, write it out, figure out the gematria. And, oh, that's a number that refers to some other things that actually relate to what the message is. Crowley had the famous one in The Vision of the Voice where he runs into the angel. He asks, what is the word of the aeon? And the angel says, Makashana. And Crowley's like, blah, it's not Makashana. It's abrahadabra. You got to say abrahadabra back to me. Okay, but later he's writing out the word. He realizes that you spell out Makashana and it comes out to 418, which is the same numeration as abrahadabra. And so in that sense, the angel was able to communicate the word to Crowley in a way that could not possibly just be his conscious mind reflecting it back. And so that's interesting to see things like that happening. And when those happen in path readings and spirit communications, it's always helpful to be able to apply stuff like that to the information you're receiving from spirits. Because like I talked about with psychic senses, one of the biggest issues with spirit communication is getting your own thoughts mixed up with those of the spirit. And so, if you're receiving a message and you're getting that message clear enough that it communicates some gematria, well, that's helpful. And that's going to tell you, okay, I'm really in touch with something here. So I'm going to wrap this up in a couple of minutes here. I think that one of the things about vibration that I think is important to understand is it's not, again, and I say this about a lot of things, it's not the kind of thing where you do it a little bit differently than somebody else. It's wrong and it's going to cause problems. You want magic to be flowing and comfortable when you do it. You don't want magic to be the kind of thing where, you're exerting, all this effort and then you're tensing up and you're not breathing as clearly and all this kind of stuff, trying to get something right or perfect according to, some outside instruction that you read. Vibration works fine when it's done the way I describe it, and it works fine, the way I describe it with some changes. You'll notice when I do the star, I actually do multiple tones for that. So I'm doing the Kabbalistic cross and the star ruby. It's like, that's not quite. In fact, I bounce around the resonant frequency a little bit. And you'll find after you do this a lot, there are multiple points that are good for vibration based on how your physical body is put together. Okay, how your voice box works, how your mouth works, all that kind of stuff. And you'll find there are multiple tones that you can hit, and it can be very effective in a ritual to switch between them to indicate certain things. And that's fine. It's just this idea of vibrating at kind of a monotone that resonates with your head is what they recommend at the beginning. But I have found you can deviate from that and your ritual results can be fine. Okay. It's really not a case where, it has to be done absolutely perfectly or something dire is going to happen. Magic really doesn't work that way. And I think that's one of the big pieces of magical literacy that I want to get out to people is that, like a horror movie, you one little thing wrong and it's like a disaster. Magic, first of all, in many cases, the little things are not vitally important to making the ritual work if everything else is working. And second of all, if you do mess up a ritual to the point where it's messed up, what's going to happen is nothing. Okay, it's not going to produce a probability shift. It's just not going to work. And so I would say, focus more on doing the practice, getting up to speed on it, doing the work and getting to the point where you understand, you understand these basics and how it works. You have a sense of how the flow goes in a successful operation. And that stuff is stuff you can't learn from a book. You can't learn it from watching a video. You learn it by, implementing, your daily magical practice, and then moving on from there to doing, whatever kind of operations you want based on the circumstances of your life. So I'm going to end there. And again, like, subscribe, click the little bell for notifications. Good YouTuber. Got the donation link. All donations are appreciated. You know what to do with that. And I'm going to thank you very much for watching. And here's wishing you a great rest of the evening. Love is the law. Love under will.